Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another one of our Beck LinkedIn live sessions. My name's Daniel Evans. I'm the Chief Executive here at Birmingham Enterprise Community. I am really excited to be joined by Ken Valledy this morning. Good morning, Ken.
Morning. How are you?
I'm very good. How about yourself?
Good. Nice early start. So no, good. Looking forward to a good day. It's been a good week so far.
Fantastic. That's really good to hear. This morning, we're going to be talking about the topic that we've set for the session is how startups can work with corporates. We're going to have a little bit of a chat to Ken about kind of his journey, some of the things that he's done. Of course, there's this topic on kind of startups working with corporates. And then finally, really touch on a recent book that Ken has authored called the Startup Lexicon. So Ken, to start us off, tell us, we're going to kind of go on a bit of a journey first. Where did you get started in your career and what was the kind of first steps?
So I'm by trade, if you want to say it that way, I'm a marketing guy, brand marketing guy. So up until 8 years ago, I was in brand marketing. Most of my career was in brand marketing. I kind of came out of university with a business degree, went into analytics and then went into brand marketing. My last brand marketing, or the last company I worked for on the brand side, was AB InBev, Anheuser-Busch InBev, the massive global brewer. I did a few brand director roles there, looked after brands like Beck's, the German Pilsner brand. And in my final years at AB InBev, I had an international role. So I had a team under me across Western Europe, and our remit was really to look at all the digital, as they called it in those days, digital work we did and align it around a Western European strategy. So I was constantly on the Eurostar, in and out of Europe 2 or 3 times a week, and then the occasional trip every month over to the States where the main HQ was. So I did that for 4 years, and that kind of took me up to about 2013, and things were going fine. I didn't mind the corporate life. I was doing pretty well, and it literally was one day coming back on the Eurostar on a Thursday night, which is when everyone comes back into the UK generally. I picked up a magazine, the Eurostar magazine, I think, and it talked about the startup world in Shoreditch and how it was bubbling to the surface back then. And I was fascinated by it, and I wanted to find out more. So I started to attend some events, which I found very difficult to do. I had to kind of go in as an investor. So to a certain extent, I lied a bit about my role. And I met some startups, and I found out that, one, the technologies out there were incredible. I wasn't aware of any of them. But two, how vibrant and positive and how energetic the startup mindset is compared maybe to my corporate mindset. And it really got me. It made a big impression on me. And I just thought, not only can some of these technologies work with the brands that I work with in AB InBev, but also from a personal perspective, I get a lot from working with people like this who are very, very positive thinking, very fast moving. So in a nutshell, I jumped the corporate ship back in the start of 2014, mainly to try and join these two sides up. I felt there was a gap in the market between corporates who should be looking at startups and should be aware of startups, just as I've just become aware of them, and also startups who want to work with corporates. So back in 2014, I found this gap in the market to be in between the two. And I then started on this quest to not only build relationships up with the startup scene, first of all in London, then further out, but also trying to join the two parties up. So what we did then, and fast forward to where I am now, my main role in life really is to take briefs from the corporate world. And these briefs can be anything from marketing briefs, finance briefs, recruitment briefs, anything that they believe they've got a problem with or a challenge, and then go and search globally to see what technology startup opportunities are out there. And then through a process we have, it culminate in the startup and the corporate working together on a paid pilot. So I now co-found a company called Progressive, and the main part of the business I run is all around joining our clients, large corporates, to best-in-class startups where both sides can work together on a pilot and help each other to grow.
That's fantastic. And I think, that kind of resonates really well, that energy, the vibrancy, the mindset of the kind
Cool.
whole start. My apologies, the connection dropped a little bit there. So other than those kind of things, what else is it that kind of startups can bring to corporates?
So I think they can bring. I think one, there's obviously the technology. So if there is a brief and the startup's services or tech offering is relevant, there's a technical fit. But I also think from working together, startups bring a new lease of life, I feel, into the corporate culture. So from companies we've worked with, corporates we've worked with, they've really benefited from physically face-to-face meeting startups, which has been difficult in the last 2 years, but meeting startups and themselves becoming aware of the different backgrounds and diversities in the startup scene. I think there's still a perception out there from large companies that startups are, and I excuse the term, but like acne-ridden teenagers coding in bedrooms. There's a lot more than that. There's, I know, I'm sure you know, Daniel, startups come in many guises, different ages, genders, race, etc., and all with different backgrounds and all with different offerings. So I think that awareness and that different positive mindset really has a positive impact on corporates who work with startups. So the tech is important, but it's that kind of cultural mix. And I think on the other side, startups benefit from understanding how large companies work as well. And if the two work together and they go through 1, 2, or 3 pilots or pieces of work together, I think both sides benefit, both from a commercial perspective, but also from a personal perspective, because you're working with different people outside of your normal daily community, should we say. So I think there's a lot of softer, maybe less tangible benefits from corporates working with startups and vice versa, outside of the brief and the tech.
That's awesome. And really to bring that to life, can you maybe give us an example of a corporate and a startup that have worked together that you've perhaps worked with?
Yeah, so we work with a large FMCG client. I can't name who they are, but they've given us a brief recently to look into different ways to contextually target their customers online, and they've worked with their media agency, and we found a super startup based in London called Illuma, who help contextually target potential consumers online. It sounds very kind of technical, but it's a fantastic piece of kit which kind of questions whether you're placing your ads in the right, should we say, digital positions or environments. And the results came through a couple of months ago, and they've been phenomenal. I mean, really good results, much more effective and positive maybe than we all thought. And as a result of that, the large corporate is now going to take that startup relationship to the next stage, where they start doing numerous pieces of work with them and starting to open the startup up to working with other brands within this large FMCG. We've also had briefs we've worked on where we've had corporates wanting to get more involved in esports and gaming. So we've looked into technologies that enable brands to have a presence within esports. We work very closely with other clients who are looking more on the ESG side of things. So they're looking for technologies that help them on their ESG strategy. So there's a big thing now about Scope 3 measurement. How can you measure the carbon footprint of your supply chain? And we've gone out and helped one of our large corporates find a company called Planetly. I believe they're based in Germany, and they help a large corporate connect with, engage with, and also help their supply chain measure their carbon footprint in a very standard, consistent, realistic way. So there's superb, technologies out there, and the briefs keep coming. And we've had wild briefs as well. We had a brief, I always say, from a client who, social housing construction client, who was looking for technologies where you could place a piece of tech on a water pipe and tell whether that pipe is going to leak before it starts leaking, which I didn't, if I'm honest. When I got that, I thought, is that possible? But once you start digging and you start leveraging the network, you find that there's whole ecosystems of companies out there that do that. So I would argue the majority of our briefs are, I'd say 40% are marketing-based briefs, which is my old background. But then we're getting more briefs now from different departments within our corporate clients. So it could be finance briefs. We've had briefs to do with, is there technology to help us recruit better at a certain level? And we've had briefs to do with water pipes. We've had briefs to do with all sorts of things. How can we turn certain waste into a new product? So all sorts of briefs that keep us on our toes, keep me on my toes. And to be honest, one day is never the same as the next. So I'm always learning quite a lot from, one, understanding a brief, but two, understanding the technologies that are out there that could be relevant for that brief. And then the challenge I have is to understand that and take that back to the client and help them understand it. That's where I kind of do a bit of taking the information and trying to sell it out to the client so they understand the art of the possible. And that's the most challenging thing, I would argue, to do.
100%. So there's of course with there being a wide variety of briefs, a wide variety of challenges. Of course, that means that a wide variety of startups can get involved in this and really take that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we always say to a corporate client, I mean, the clients we work for, are companies like Procter & Gamble, Mercedes, GSK, people like that, DFS, the furniture retailer. We've said to all of our clients that when you work with us and we help you connect with startups, the one thing we need you to have is an open mind. And I don't believe, we like a brief to be quite open. We don't want it to be too open because you're going to come back with 500 companies that could be relevant, but we don't want it to be too closed that there could be a handful and you might be missing something if you make it too close at the start. But we say to all our clients, keep an open mind. And when we do come back with that list, when we put it into a deck and there's all the different pages for all the different startups, we always include what we call 5 or 6 left field options. And these are startups that are about 40% on the brief, but 60% not. But the 40% is interesting. So we generally say to a client, here are the bulk of what we got. These people could hit this brief in different ways. They all offer different services, but it's relevant to the brief. And here are a few companies that don't quite hit the brief, but aren't completely off the brief. But you know what? They're really interesting as well. And sometimes we find, Daniel, that a client will take everything in, and at the end of the whole process, because we whittle it down through pitch sessions right to one winner, if you want to call it that. At the end of the process, some clients will go with the left field piece of tech, which wasn't really in the running at the start, but because they're intrigued by what it can do or what the team can do, they think, well, let's go with this left field one for this brief. Yeah. So we try and keep it open, and at the same time we ask clients to keep an open mind, because it isn't we want this and we will provide a perfect bang on match, because the briefs are open and the tech that comes back is quite open. We want both sides to have an open mind, but especially the corporate side.
And that's really interesting. So we recently worked on a project with a couple of partners called Innovation Engine 3. So it was a corporate challenge kind of based project looking at cross-sector innovation. And again, we saw there the same thing, that it was really important to have a very clear articulation of the challenge that needed to be there. But as you said, in terms of solution, then what we kind of the discussions that we had with the challenge holders was about that openness, because of course, if you come in and say, we want the solution to be an app or a game or this, straight away you're kind of putting constraints on what that solution could be.
And I think that we always say to clients, if you want an app that's got 4 buttons on it, red, yellow, blue, whatever button, and each button does this, then it's best you go to a developer to build that for you, because that's very specific. But if you want options around it, say, how do I drive conversion on my website? How do I improve the performance of my content? How do I measure my supply chain in terms of scope 3? Or what technologies are out there that make me be able to turn a waste product into part of our live products? They're quite open briefs. Then we can go away and we can come back with lots of options. So there's many ways with the briefs we get. There's not just one type of technology we believe that can solve that brief. We want to come back with different options. And in some occasions, clients will pick 2 at the end. But the key thing we add, and I like to mention, is we don't have any commercial dealings with the startups. So we have a commercial arrangement with the corporate, our client. But the main thing is we insist to all of our clients that if they want to work with us on this process and work with the startup at the end of it, they have to pay the startup. So we make sure these are paid pieces of work. To be completely blunt, if a client was to say, can we get a free trial out of it, we wouldn't work with them. It's really important that, if we get to the business end of the process and there's work on the table, it's important that, the startup is paid for their time and services. Yeah. So when we come back with these options, we want the client to make a serious decision because they've got to pay for it. So if they do want to go more left field, then they know what the risk is, and they're taking it into account with, because they're going to have to pay money for this experience, shall we say. So we insist on it, they're paid pilots, but at the same time, we like the idea of coming back with many different options, because sometimes clients think, oh, which one do we go with? And that's a nice choice to have.
Yeah.
And as I say, sometimes I go with 2.
Yeah, no, that's super cool. So there'll be entrepreneurs that are watching this now who think, okay, there's some fantastic opportunities here. I could definitely see how that could be attractive for our business. For those entrepreneurs, what would be your advice in terms of where to get started with this? What should they start thinking about? Where can they look for opportunities?
Well, I mean, the way we work is I've got built a very good network over the years, global network of lots of great contacts. Daniel, you being one, where like people like yourself are tapped into the startup world. So when we get briefs, we send those briefs out to our network. It needs to be people who run accelerators, etc. So we have access to, in a nice way, numerous black books globally. And through time, I've met, God knows, over 1,000 startups. So you build up your knowledge base. But the more people we get to know, the better. So if there are people out there who have got some really interesting technology, by all means, connect up with me on LinkedIn and send me through a 1-page or 2-page about your tech. I can't promise to come back straight away and say, yes, we've got a brief, but I do believe in serendipity, that if you want to send me a 1-pager, I'll definitely read it. And if I feel there's a brief that we've got that could be relevant, I'll reach out. And if there isn't, it's great knowing what you do, because I believe that something may come along and it's good to know what's out there early. So if your tech's right and seems good and a brief comes along in 3 months, it's great. I've got your information to hand. So first of all, definitely reach out to me on LinkedIn. Might be the easiest way of doing it. The other thing I'd say is just keep your network going yourself and seeing if you can get close to corporates and work out who else is working with the corporate world. We're not the only one. People do it in different ways as well, but just start to go to events where there are large companies there. There's not many of those events, but try and go to them. And also in a passive way, there's nothing wrong with trying to reach out to people in the corporate world. But obviously, like everyone, they're very busy. But that is what I would say generally is be realistic. If you direct message someone who heads up innovation at a large company, it is unlikely they're going to get back to you. But there's nothing wrong with at least connecting up with them. But I'm more than happy to take 1-pages or so from people. And if I can help, as I say, there's no commercial deal with myself and a startup. So I'm more than happy to help. And there's nothing involved with. We can connect you up and get you involved in a brief. Fantastic.
Awesome. And the kind of next stage from that. So when they're in a position where they're responding to a brief. So this, I think, could apply whether it's this kind of thing, but also, public challenges where like what we did with Innovation Engine 3. What would be the advice in terms of the best way to respond to a brief? What do the startups need to think about?
The biggest learning there's 3 kind of insights, 2 to 3 insights I've found over the years of doing 100+ briefs and meeting, as I say, 1,000+ startups. The first one is, in what we do, my job is to take all the different options that are out there, bundle it all up and sell it back to the client, or explain the options to the client. One thing that definitely works, and it's a small thing, but there's definitely a correlation, is if startups have got a small video which explains what they do, it could be a 1-minute video, that works wonders. So when I'm going back to a client and I've said, we've got 20 companies here that you should consider, and we go through each one, videos always work. People always watch videos. I think they take more in. It sounds obvious, but if you've got some budget, I would put together a small 1-minute, 90-second, 2-minute video about what your company does and why it's beneficial. It doesn't have to go into any detail, but people generally click play when they see a short video rather than War and Peace on an email or a LinkedIn message. So one, I found that videos help get startups through the process towards the final pitch session. Obviously, be realistic. So I know it's very easy, and I said earlier about this optimism, but really be realistic about what is possible and what isn't. We've had a couple of occasions where a startup will oversell themselves, and then they get the pilot, and then the pilot starts, and they're actually 6 months off being able to do what the pilot or the brief needs. No one wants to be in that situation. Take my word for that. So be realistic. And then the third one, and this is the biggest one, and it's a very simple one, and most of the big insights are simple, if I'm honest, is if you get a chance to pitch to a corporate, just be aware of the time you have. So we generally, when it comes to the pitch session, we generally say you've got, say, 30 minutes, and we recommend you have 10 to 15 minutes presenting and 10 to 15 minutes for questions. Every minute you go over that first 15 and you keep presenting, you are losing your chance of getting that gig. And if I could go down and do all the numbers, I would say there's a 90% chance. If you go over your 15 and you go into 20 to 25 minutes talking, and you've only got 5 minutes for questions, your chance of getting chosen is almost 0. So the pitch is important. Keep it the time and keep it focused, but always allow time for questions, because that's where a corporate will ask you questions, get your feedback. You can ask them questions, and they get a feeling of what you or your team are like to work with. And that's just as important as your tech. So if they feel that you've got 15 minutes and you're talking over and you're going on and on and on, they think, oh, I can't work with this person. They're just going to talk all the time. So do be wary of the times. They're not just there as part of a sentence. If it's 15 minutes presenting and 15 minutes pitching, keep to those times. And the other bit would be when you do pitch, just focus on the brief. It's very easy to go off on your journey you've been on. It's very easy to go off into here's the team. It's very easy to go off into here's the investment we got. But that's not relevant to the brief. So if the brief is this is what the client's looking for, and you've got 15 minutes, I would spend most of that 15 minutes saying about one, what your company does, and two, why it's relevant for this brief. And that's the best use of that time. And then leave whatever it is, 15 minutes for questions. We find a lot of companies who I've always said in the past are bang on and they should win the brief and get the pilot, don't get it because they talk about everything about their company, all the things they do, most of which isn't relevant to that brief. And then they overrun. And at the end of it, their key offering, which is relevant to the brief, is missed. And it's really frustrating. I'd say 90% of the time, the reason good companies don't get the gig is because they don't adhere to the time. And it sounds petty, but it's so important. And people who know me will know I always go on about this, but it
sets that I think expectation. We talk to this a lot about with some of the international businesses that we work with that then we support to come here. We say kind of in terms of punctuality, timekeeping, both in the sense of turning up on time, but also, if you've been given 5 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour to present something, stick to that. Because of course, if I guess the kind of reading or the feeling that people sometimes could get is if we've given you 30 minutes to deliver this and you've overshot it, and we've seen it where people will overshoot by quite a way. If we've given you 12 weeks to do a project, are you going to then deliver that in 16 weeks, 20 weeks? Are you going to overshoot with that?
Yeah, and I think the other thing is to remember that from the corporate side, which I was in most of my life before, like everyone, they've got busy days ahead. So if they've got a morning put out for pitches, that they've got an afternoon of meetings and other stuff as well. So they want their time to be, if they're going to dedicate a morning to listen to pitches, they just hope that people keep to the times and give them the best information to make the right decision. So if someone comes in and over pitches or goes off subject or turns up late, the corporate will think, well, you're not helping me now, you're not helping you. This is ruining a bit of the morning session. I'm not getting all the information I need. And they get more frustrated. So you end up, and that's why you don't end up generally getting further on in the process. So it's respecting the time that corporates have. This isn't their day job. When they sit down and listen to startups, this is what they do every now and then. Their day job and everything else is completely different. So you've got to excite them and make them feel like, God, this is really great. This is better than what I normally do. This is interesting seeing startups, but also respect the time and give them as much information as you can, but give them as much chance to ask questions as well in the time given. If you overrun or things such as that, it's almost like they're saying, right, you haven't got it. Let's move on. And everyone's very polite, Daniel. No one's going to turn around and say, oh, you overran, we're not going to give it to you. They all say it's fantastic. And then afterwards, no, they ran out of time.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. So kind of coming round then to a couple of challenges. We've seen kind of two challenges that a lot of startups kind of have when it comes to this sort of stuff. First one is around kind of, I guess, the fear of being taken advantage of or being almost a little bit bullied by such a bigger entity. Second is around kind of language and being understood. So let's take the first one. So around kind of, the fear almost that the corporate's up here and they're down here. What is the reality? And second, what can startups do when they're working with those relationships to protect themselves?
I see this all the time. When you come and pitch to a large company, there is this, you're a small company, they're a large company. You have maybe an office in a co-working space somewhere. They're the 15th floor on a 25-floor building, say. So there's not any physical differences, but just the size of the companies both sides represent is disproportionately different. So all I say is all you can do is, do your best and try and answer the brief in your pitch. You can't do anything else. You cannot control how people feel. You can do your best and hopefully they will get what they can from it. One thing that I've had come back from startups that I know who have been very successful is At the end of the day, if you go and pitch to someone in, let's say, Procter & Gamble, that's a huge global company. But at the end of the day, if you get that brief with Procter & Gamble, you'll be working with 3 or 4 people in one of their brand teams, say. And that's all you will work with on that pilot at the very most. So you'll be working with 4 people. You may have 4 people on your side who manage that account. And as time goes on and you start to know each other, you kind of forget a little bit of where you're coming from. It's just 2 groups of 3 or 4 people working together on a project. So if you get that pilot and you start working with a large corporate, you don't end up, should we say, seeing hundreds of people and being reminded all the time how large the company is. At the end of the day, you're working with a small team, and it can be 1 or 2 people. So it really comes down to relationships like you would normally do. So the corporate guys kind of goes a bit as you work with large companies, because you're working with small teams and it feels like you're working with anyone. You know, I don't know many corporates who sit there with the big logo behind them and all the numbers about how big they are behind them every time there's a Zoom call. I mean, as individuals, just want to do their job well. So, you know, it's just empathy. I also think on the flip side, corporates go into a little bit worried, because if they're going to work with an unknown entity and a new team and they're paying for it, if it doesn't go right, they've got to be able to explain that to their peers and their line managers. So both sides go into it with a little bit of apprehension and say a little bit of fear in different ways. And one of the roles we have, obviously, is when we sit in these meetings and we do this filtering process, is to manage expectations on both sides as you go through. So when we get to the point of chosen startup or startups and the client working together, both sides are aware of the other side, both sides are aware of what to look out for, and both sides hopefully are a bit more realistic in terms of expectations. And that's our job. But if we weren't there, I would always say at the end of the day, you're working with people. You're not working with a large company and loads of buildings everywhere. You're working with people. And if you can make that work with that small team, then that's the best you can do.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I've seen a couple of comments and questions coming in the chat. Just going to touch on the second point, then we'll go across to them. So thank you for those that have sent them in. So the second point around kind of language and being understood, obviously highly relevant with the book.
Yes.
Obviously Startup Lexicon. The fact that corporate world, startup world have their own sets of languages, and of course then the same with if you're working with somebody from a different country who speaks a different language. The big kind of concern, the big problem is if we can't communicate well, if we can't understand each other, it can cause problems with that relationship. So tell us a little bit, one, about kind of your experience of this kind of space, and secondly, then how that's led to the book as well.
Yeah. So, well, if there's one disappointment I had from moving from the corporate world to the startup world, it was the startup world had more jargon than the corporate world. And I always thought the corporate world was full of jargon, ducks in a row, moving goalposts, singing from the same hymn sheet, all these different terms. And oh my goodness, it's just like, a different language. And I was hoping when you go outside of that into the startup world, it would be different. But actually, there's more jargon and words and terms in the startup world, I think, than the average corporate world. So when I jumped ship, I was literally overtaken by all these words. I didn't even know what enterprise meant. I'll be completely candid there. Someone said it's an enterprise player. I thought, enterprise, what does that mean? It means a company. Well, I didn't know that. And then you started to come across things like burn rate, run rate, convertible notes, series A, B, C, and you don't get you don't really understand what they mean by the word. I mean, burn rate, is this like burning? Runway, is that like a plane? It sounds silly, but you think, what does that mean? Now, if I'm honest, and I'll be honest in this thing, I winged it a little bit at the start. My pride got in the way, and I thought I'll have to try and find out afterwards. But as time went on, I realized I needed to know what these words meant to be credible, and it took a bit of research. And I found that it took me some time to really get a robust hold and understanding of the key words that startups use. Fast forward to where we are now. A couple of years ago, for an Excel, I started writing down some of these words that I'd picked up since I'd started working with corporates. And it started to get to 30, 40, 50, 60. And I thought, my goodness, that's the ones I know. So I feel there was a need for a book, a reference book, just to define, say, 200 plus definitions, A to Z, of keywords that startups and investors use. And I joined up with Eamon Kerry, who up until very recently headed up Techstars in the UK. And between us, we pulled together a book called the Startup Lexicon, which is, as I say, is 200 plus words, A to Z, and their key definitions. But also we've got 25 to 30 expert stories behind some of those words as well. So we brought this kind of reference book out to help people. And there's two kind of people we're aiming at. One is people who are, I would say, starting to work with startups, like corporates or people who want to work with startups in some way. They're going to have to understand the language, and this book will help them cross that line comfortably. And the other audience is more people who are starting a business, because I'm a firm believer that there's some great business minds out there, but people might, not have the confidence to make that first step. And it'd be such a crying shame that people who have got the skill and the business brains don't make that step or don't reach their potential because they feel overcome and a bit challenged by the language. So that's a real passion of mine. I just want to give, without saying it holier than whole, I want to give people a fighting chance. And I think sometimes language, unfortunately, gets in the way and can make you feel a little bit outside of the circle. So it's for people who want to work with startups, and it's also for people who are a startup or want to be a startup. And hopefully the book helps both sides. And also there's an educational side as well, where anyone studying entrepreneurship at university as well. So it's a kind of it's quite a generic A to Z. Hopefully it brings some value. It's not too heavy, but it's a starter. As Eamon said, it's a primer for you to start to understand. So that's the reason behind the book, Daniel. It's not a huge book. It's not hugely expensive. It's just a starter for 10 for people who are involved or want to be involved in the startup world, because it'd be a crying shame if language gets in the way.
100. No, I completely agree with that. I think now I'm at the point where I was in a meeting literally yesterday, and somebody said that they mentioned a term, and I stopped them and said, "To be honest with you, I have no idea what you mean by that. Not a clue what you mean. Could you explain it?" Sure, explained it. Did that. If I go back a couple of years, there is no way that I would have stopped them and said that, because, as you said, it's that case of feeling like if I don't understand the terminology that's being used, I don't belong here. As you said, I'm an outsider. I'm that kind of sense of imposter syndrome kicks in, and then you're frantically like, what does it term mean? How do I think? The other big problem, and one thing that I really love about the book again, is that kind of a go-to resource, because you can put a term into Google, but of course, if you get thousands, millions of hits, and some websites that aren't actually that helpful, I've seen definitions before online, and I'm like, that it doesn't really mean that. Like you've kind of vaguely given a sense of what it could mean, but I don't think you're on the case. Whereas these definitions in the book, and again, I love it how they're backed up with the expert stories as well, is kind of a something to, as you said, start people off, get people to understand this is
Oh, you cut off a bit there, Daniel.
There we go. Yeah, apologies for that. The connection just dropped a little bit. But yeah, so having all that, having it in one place, I think is absolutely awesome. As you said, whether you're starting out, whether you're a student and you're studying, certainly somebody that did a MSc in entrepreneurship, again, it would have been useful in the classroom then. And also, as you said, then for corporates or organizations looking to work with startups, it's useful for them to use it as well. Fantastic. We're gonna take a run through the kind of comments and questions and see what we've got. So first, little comment from Owen. Thank you, Owen, for kind words. Again, somebody else from LinkedIn that's out there enjoying the live. Another LinkedIn users put, do you attract web developers and software engineers from all around the world? So I guess in a kind of broader sense, with these briefs, are you working with organizations from around the world?
It depends on the brief. Sometimes a client will want more established startups, and a startup or scale up that's worked already with a different corporate. So they want a case study. Some clients will want a startup that I would say is now getting into the SME area, so more established company. But I would say 10% of the briefs, the client will say, we want something from scratch. We want something built from scratch. And that's where we reach out to potential web developers, software engineers to see what is possible. I'm not a web developer, as you most likely can tell. I'm not a coding kind of, I'm more a marketing guy. But yes, we do get about 10% of the briefs are, is this possible? And can we work with someone to build something from scratch? And I would argue that's where we do reach out to web developers.
Awesome. Fantastic. Number one from Owen. So just asking again, how to get access to the corporate briefs?
Yeah, so the way it works with us is we get the briefs from the client, and then we go searching the network we've built to see what's out there. And as I said earlier, if people want to send me a one-page on LinkedIn about their company, we can definitely, for want of a better term, take that into account. And when the right brief comes up, we can get in touch. We don't actually put those briefs out on live LinkedIn or anything, because it would just be quite a messy affair to bring it all together. And so we actually go through our process of working with our network, going to companies we already know, and again, people that have sent stuff into us, and then we get in touch with the startup. I'm a big believer in, I'd rather get in touch with a startup and they know that if I'm getting in touch with them, there's a brief on the table and some tangible benefit at the end of it. So once we get a brief, we go through our process. But as I say, if people want to get in touch and send me a one-page or link to their website on LinkedIn, then we'll definitely look at that and take that into account when we get the right brief. But we don't put it out to everyone, because it would just be a free-for-all and could get a little bit messy. So we have a structure that we follow.
Yeah, awesome. And I won't say thank you as well. This one's going to come on screen, but it might be a bit big, so it might break the screen. No, it's okay. So some of these corporates mentioned are also prolific innovators. Isn't there a risk that the corporate will get the startup's proprietary knowledge and then just swallow them up with their huge resources once the pilot is finished? This is a common strategy where large corporates with more resources take a first mover, clearly plug the gap.
Yep.
In the market would be interested to hear your comments on that.
Yeah, I'm not saying that isn't true, and I'm sure it is, but in my experience in the last 8 years of working with our corporate clients, that's not happened. Most, if not all, of our clients look to do what they call a partnership approach, which is they work with a startup on a pilot, and then if that pilot goes well, they incorporate that startup into their supplier system, so they become a business as usual supplier, and then they work with that startup to get them introduced to other brands within the portfolio. I've never had it yet where a startup, and I keep in touch with all the startups that I've worked with, have come back to me and said, so-and-so have, for want of a better term, screwed me over and they've taken our IP, or they're doing this, and we've got into a legal battle. I think the vast amount of corporates realise that their capabilities internally really can't match their needs. And they have to go out to this billion-trillion pound R&D ecosystem, which is the startup world. And I think they've got, the ones I work with anyway, got more of an open mind to partner. And, I can see there is a fear that you could work with a corporate, but don't forget, although I'm not experienced it, but if you do work with a corporate and you feel that something's going that way, or you just don't like the tone of the corporate, then just don't work with them. I mean, I know it's difficult to turn business away, but, gut feel is if you're working with someone and you just don't quite trust their intentions, then if you're working with me on that, then let me know and say no one has yet. But, obviously we need to know that. But generally speaking, if you feel uneasy, don't just say no. But I've not experienced it personally. And I think a lot of companies now, especially in the last 7 or 8 years, realise that they haven't got the resource, the time to maybe do that. They just want to partner with people, keep it very clean, and both sides benefit. Now, I might be seeing through rose-tinted glasses, but the corporates we work with are like that.
Yeah. No, I think that makes sense, but I can fully understand
absolutely, yeah.
businesses with a concern and that kind of stuff. I think
it's your business. When you go and talk to a corporate, as I say earlier, it's you talking to a handful of people, forget their backgrounds. And if you feel uncomfortable working with those people, and there will be, unfortunately, some charlatans out there, then ask the right questions. And if it doesn't feel right, then just pull out. There's no commitment for a small company to have to work with a large company because of the size of the large company. If you don't feel right, you'll be respected much more for saying it's not for us. Honesty is always right. So go with your gut feel. But if it does get to a point, you might have to get legal advice on contracts or something. But I can't really comment on how that works because we've not had that. But no, I'm not dismissing the question. Absolutely, there will be not so good examples out there. But luckily, the ones we've had and worked with have been fine.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I think just to add a point on there, and you kind of brought it up at the end, seeking counsel around kind of the best way to protect your IP is critical there. So, one, the relationship with the between you and the corporate organization, making sure you've got the right stuff in there, especially where things are being developed. So IP assignments are really important to understand who is actually going to own the IP.
Yes.
Secondly, is on front of then your own IP protection. So if you've got patents in place or trademarks or whatever it is that you're looking to protect, again, getting some sound advice there, making sure that you've got the right protection. But that doesn't just go for working with corporates. That's your startup. It's acting diligently. It's taking care.
Yeah, it's just be wary.
100%. Number one. So from Hussein. So what is the most important differentiator between startups that gets brief awarded from the startups that don't?
Yeah, focus. One word, focus. If you focus on everything, less is more. So when you come to talk to a corporate in whatever guise, be it through our process or just generally, if you understand what their problems are as quickly as you can and focus your pitch or whatever you're presenting in that area and don't drift off and keep it short and sweet, then you give yourself the best chance. I always say to every startup that is going to go and pitch to one of our clients, the best you can do and control is at the end of your pitch, the client understands what your offering is and understands how it can help them with that brief. If you do both of those and they understand both those areas, that's all you can do. And then it's in the lap of the gods. Are they going to say yes to you or yes to someone else? But you've given yourself the best chance. If you want it to go the other way, as I said earlier, then keep it all open and talk about everything and how great you are, but it's not focused. And at the end of it, they don't get an idea of what you do. They think you do loads of things, but not quite get it. And there's no time for questions, then they think, oh, we can't bother. We haven't got time to go around again. So focus, keep it focused, and just at the end of the day, make sure the client understands what you offer and why it could be right for them. That's all you can do. But focus is the thing.
Wonderful, fantastic. And one final question, good question to finish us off on. Where do we get the book?
Well, the book, it's called the Startup Lexicon. And I think Daniel's going to put a link to the Amazon page. There's also we've got like a web page, www.thestartuplexicon.com, and you can go there and find out more about it. But that's the book. It's available on physical, good old-fashioned physical copy or Kindle. So yeah, that's where it's in most online places now. Amazon being one, but other bookstores online as well.
Fantastic. Well, Ken, it's been a pleasure to have you join us this morning.
I've enjoyed it.
No, it's been a really great conversation. As Ken said, I am going to include a link to the book in the comment section below. So whether you're watching on any of the platforms, so on YouTube, on LinkedIn, on Twitter, there'll be a link there. I'll also be putting some links to a couple of things that we've got coming up. So we've got our next round of our Sustainability and Circular Economy program about to start in a couple of weeks. We're also recruiting for our Forward Accelerator program. And we also have a social coming up in early October that I'd love to see a lot of you at. Again, thank you, Ken, for your time this morning. Thank you for your insight. Thank you for your wisdom. If people want to reach out as well and get in touch, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, just via LinkedIn is easier. Connect up via LinkedIn, and I'm more than happy if you want to send me a link to your website or 1-page, 2-page deck. As I say, keep it quite focused. And if there's a brief we've got that's relevant, I'll connect up and we have a chat. But if there isn't, serendipity plays a part. We could get a brief in 2 months' time that's relevant. So by all means, get in touch via LinkedIn. It's the easiest way.
Awesome. Well, thank you everybody for joining us this morning. Hope it's been a fantastic start to your day. Enjoy the rest of the day, whatever it is you're doing. And I will speak to you all very soon. Thank you very much.
No problem. Thank you.